Okay, good morning everybody, and we'll start the meeting now. Welcome to today's meeting of the Corporate Governance Committee. This meeting is being public. For those of you not able to, the webcast will be available for viewing on the County Council website. Before I go any further, could I ask to mute their microphone unless speaking, and also who's to speak? Would you enable your mic? Do you have any officers are presented? If you can instant message me, and I of each item to make sure that everybody has had this. I will get a note of that. Now I know that Mr. Kaufman was having difficulty, but he has now joined us. I think all members are here. The only people who aren't here at the moment, as far as I can see, is Mr. Orson and Mrs. Wright. So this meeting, due to the current situation, all other members of the committee will be joining online, along with officers presenting today. So firstly, I will go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves. Can I please ask, as I said, all officers and members to remember to turn on their microphones and cameras when speaking and off when you have finished speaking. So I understand there are no substitutes today, so I'll go round and ask you to introduce yourself. So starting with Mr. Bolter.
Good morning all, Bill Bolter.
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. Mr. Coxon.
Good morning, Chairman. John Coxon here, representing Ashby-de-la-Zouch, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Gillard.
Morning, Chairman. Tony Gillard, representing the Division.
Thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Morning, Chairman. Jeffrey Kaufman from OB.
Lovely. Now, I don't believe that we have Mr. Orson here. No, we don't. Mr. Terry Richardson, can you just introduce yourself?
Yes, Councillor Terry Richardson for Narborough and Whetstone.
Mr. Sheehan, could you introduce yourself?
I'm Sean Sheehan, representing Forest and Nation Division.
Thank you very much. And I don't believe we have Mrs. Wright here on the line. No, we don't. So we'll continue. So the first item on the agenda committee is the minutes. Now, before we go through and propose those, I'm going to ask Declan to give us a statement on the. This isn't open for discussion. This is just a pure fact. At our last meeting, we asked the external auditors to review their fees, and perhaps for committee's benefit, before we accept the minutes, could I ask you please, Declan, to advise us of the outcome of that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We have had some discussions with Grant Thornton around the fees, which other authorities have nationally as well. And the Grant Thornton have agreed to reduce the proposed increase from, it was circa 20,000 before, down to 12,000, and this is on the basis of a 20% cap on the fee increase, which, although it's kind of, no increases are welcome, it does feel kind of I suppose a good outcome, or as good an outcome as we can get as a local authority. The 20% cap does benefit us as a low starting fee in the first place, means that the sterling increase is a bit lower. So we, as officers, we are comfortable with that level of increase at this stage.
That's right. Thank you. And with that, so that's informed us all where we are with that, and that's better than it was, a lot better. So it's good. It was raised in the minutes, and are surprised that was expressed, and it's obviously had some effect. So I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 31st of January 2020 are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everybody comfortable with that? Just if you don't agree with that, just speak now. All right, so we will take that as the minutes being agreed. Okay. So the next, we've received no questions from the public. and that we have received on item 3 no questions from members. There are no urgent items, so we're on to item 5, which is declarations of interest in respect of any items on the agenda. Now, I know that Mr. Richardson, you want to make a declaration, do you?
Thank you, Chairman. Just my usual one as being a Lloyds Bank pensioner in receipt of a Lloyds Bank pension.
Thank you. Thank you. So I take it there is no other member who wishes to declare an interest. So that's that. So just before we move to consider the items on the agenda, as a reminder, can I just please ask members to allow officers to present their full report before seeking to ask questions, and if you can, use the instant messaging service. As we're all online, to ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak, I propose once the officers have finished presenting the item, I will open them up for questions. And as I've just said, to indicate you have a question, please instant message me, and I will call you up one at a time. And I will check that everybody has a chance to express their views at the end. I will ask if there is anyone else to ask any questions. So, without further ado, we're now on to item 6, which is the risk management update as set out on pages 11 to 32 on the agenda pack. So I will ask Neil Jones, Head of Internal Audit and Assurance, to present the item. Neil, could I ask you to present it?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So this is the what would normally be the routine risk management update, but obviously with the effect of coronavirus on corporate risks, what we've tried to do is to bring those risks that were last reported in January forward and see what the impact was on those. There's also some information in here on what risks are emerging as we go forward and how is the Council managing any risks to its recovery objectives. And then there's just 2 small sections on the work that's been undertaken by other sections I manage on managing counter-fraud risk and ensuring insurance responsibilities are complied with. I thought it was important to start off, really, that everybody seems to be talking about risk across all organisations. Just to remind the committee, constitutionally, it has a responsibility to oversee the adequacy of the Council's risk management framework, and that includes any alternative or short-term arrangements, which I'll come on to in a moment. So during the earliest stages of the major impact of the coronavirus, the routine risk management processes were paused to enable delivery of business critical services during that period of unprecedented demand and significant upheaval. Nevertheless, I'll give you assurance that robust risk identification and evaluation remain core to decision making. So Chief Officers agreed it would be useful to update members on the corporate risk last reported in January and how they've been impacted by COVID-19. So the updates are contained in the appendix to the report, which I think starts on page 19 of your pack through to page 31. I'd normally pause there, Chair, to ask members if you wanted to ask any questions on those, but do you want me to leave those until the end, would you say?
Yeah, just leave those to the end.
Okay. Okay. So in the continuing in the report itself then, paragraph 7 introduces to the committee a new corporate risk around COVID-19, and that aims to capture the ongoing response and also the future recovery and direction. The area-wide mitigation actions are undertaken in conjunction with the Local Resilience Forum and operationally within the Council's Resilience Planning Group. So starting at paragraph 9, moving forward is an explanation of how the Council is planning its recovery, rebuilding and even refocusing its services. So the process is to identify, evaluate and manage those risks is still developing, but at the end of paragraph 14 I provide assurance that the members of the committee will still be informed about those that escalate into the corporate risk register. Starting at the bottom of page 13 and carrying on into the next 2 pages lists some categories of emerging risks and specific examples. All of these, as I'm sure you know, are nationwide risks, and some are already becoming reported as issues. So the final part of the report on pages 15 and 16, paragraphs 16 to 21, is just to provide members with some information on the work undertaken in both providing advice on mitigating the risk of fraud, which is prevalent at the moment, and ensuring insurance requirements of alternative service deliveries are being considered. And both of those services have provided valuable inputs to ensuring the Council's position is adequately protected. That's all I've got to say on the paper. Gladly take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. Right, members, you've had the report there. It's quite clear. Apart from the normal risks, the major risk is fraud and the effect of the pandemic, which has been substantial. Is there any member who would like to ask? Yes, I've got a couple of questions. So, first question, please, from Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Morning, Neil.
Morning, Mr.
Starting on page 13, really. Why was something like this pandemic not thought of in the resilience planning group? We thought about floods and all other different hazards that may before us, but I don't think anybody thought about flu pandemic or this. So I'm a bit concerned that wasn't included. I could be wrong. It could have been included, but I didn't see it anywhere. And also on the same track, what about PPE stocks? Have we got any when this started, or have we had to start from scratch? You know, I thought that one had been in the risk register somewhere along the line. The other one on recommendation on page 17, I'm pleased to see an item C has been added. And the last one I've got is on page 26, adults and communities, providing staff, shielding and the rest of it, where, you know, if I haven't got enough staff, how are we going to cope with all the elderly people we have and the vulnerable people we have? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and answer those in the sequence they came out. So why wasn't the virus included in the risk register? I think two elements here. It's always been included in a sort of regional sense in terms of pandemic risk register that's held by the Resilience Forum. So it's been there under our noses for a long time. If I had the information to hand, I, as part of my audit planning process at the beginning of the year, I got two worldwide, if you like, information documents on risks, and pandemics were not mentioned in there. It was all about cyber and environmental strategy. So I think it's caught everyone by surprise, but I'm saying I gave assurance that it was covered on the Resilience Forum risk register. Regarding the PPE stocks, I know that Chris and Declan are both on the line, and they've been heavily involved in lots of discussions around these. Is there anything that they would like to add in?
The only bit of that is obviously kind of pre-pandemic sort of PPE wasn't the focus, wasn't the sort of shortage of supply that there is now, but it was kind of as the pandemic went, it wasn't just the increase in demand for PPE, it was also the kind of the disruption to supply chains as well. So there has been specific kind of focus groups or PPE cells as have been called to deal with this in the immediate term, and that's functioning across the whole Leicestershire and Rutland region as well. But it's not something that would ordinarily be kind of a big feature of kind of the County Council's business, and like Neil says, it's kind of I suppose a pandemic on this scale just it hasn't happened for sort of a significant period of time. So although it was potentially foreseen, I think the impact and the way governments have responded to it was much harder for people to foresee.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, I'm just in a bit of a technical hitch here. I realised, sorry, unfortunately, I'd clicked on the button, but I hadn't started my video in the earlier answers. Could I just ask Mr. Bolter, he mentioned something on page 17 about a recommendation. Could he just clarify what he meant on that point?
Yes, Chair, on page 17, it's added a new risk.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's been added.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Mr. Bolter. So if I could carry on then, so on page 26 was the next question, and this was about, I understood it to be, are we going to have sufficient staff in terms of meeting our requirements under Care Act duties. Again, is that, I know Declan and Chris are talking about these daily. Is there anything they'd like to add in terms of that?
Can I add a couple of bits? As Ms. Bolt correctly sort of points out, there is an increase on demand on kind of those caring type duties during the pandemic. There's been a few different interventions. There's been a sort of sorry, things beeping me here. There's been a few interventions. There's been sort of an LLR-wide sort of recruitment drive where sort of the councils have come together, even though the employees would be part of the kind of the provider arms, but we've actually intervened to try and make that a bit more sort of sensible. There's also been quite a lot of injection of money into the providers, bearing in mind most of the care provision is outsourced. Money into those to allow them to kind of grow their business. The irony of this pandemic actually in the short term has been a bit of a drop off in demand, as there's been more kind of carers available, as it were, because people are at home instead of at work. Actually, some of the demands on home care have gone down, so the pressures have been on kind of areas like care homes, but it hasn't been so much as the sort of the shortage of staff due to sort of growing demand. It's been more kind of as incidents have emerged, but to date they have been sort of handled pretty well within the region. Obviously there has been some blips as kind of the virus has taken hold, but actually in that demand on services it's held up pretty well to date, but they are still there's still quite a big focus on making sure that can continue.
Okay. Right, thank you, Declan. Now, I would just remind everybody, if you can please turn on your cameras when you're speaking and your microphones, and when you're not speaking, just switch off your microphone and your camera. Now, there are obvious risks. One of the major risks, I think, that we would all agree is that the cybersecurity and fraud is even more important now with the amount of people working at home, and it's important that we don't get our situation, our data compromised in any way. If there are no other questions, and I can't see anybody else wanting to ask a question, I would propose that we recommend that the committee notes the impact arising from the COVID-19 on the current status of the strategic risks facing the council, that we ask for a presentation on cybersecurity at our next meeting, which I believe is on the 24th of July at 10 o'clock, and notes the risks to be added to the corporate risk register, and notes the updates regarding the emerging risks and service cover planning, counter fraud and insurance elements. I still have no questions, so can I take that as agreed? So there doesn't seem to be any dissension there, so I will take that as agreed. So the next item we're on to is the external audit assessment 2019-20 and the audit plan for 2019-20, which is on pages 33 to 80. Declan, can I invite you just to make some initial comments before I request John and Avtar to present the item?
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, the paper should hopefully be sort of pretty straightforward, and John will go into the detail. We're obviously kind of comfortable with the contents from sort of a finance sort of section point of view. The risk assessment that's contained in the report is broadly a self-assessment, and obviously it makes sense for the COVID risk that's been outlined to be added to the audit plan because of its fundamental effects. The only other point I'd just sort of pull out to the committee, because it's not covered in John's papers, is the delay to the deadline. It's a sort of a government intervention to ease pressures on the councils, which is kind of nice of them to think of the finance department. So we don't actually have to have the accounts done and dusted till November. So the latest intention is to have the audit in September. So it will come to committee later than you are used to. But that's what I was going to say. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So I believe we have welcome to John Gregory and Avtar Sohail from Grant Thornton, and I would ask them to make their presentation now.
Thanks very much, Chair. So I'll just make a few comments on this before inviting members to ask any questions, and I will deal with both of our reports in one block if that's okay. As Declan has said, the first report is a fairly routine thing that we do each year. You may well remember it coming here last year. Auditing standards require us to have discussions with officers on a range of different aspects of your sort of financial management arrangements. So things like your arrangements around fraud, your arrangements for ensuring that you are a going concern, your arrangements for making accounting estimates, and so on. And then there are some aspects of those different things that we are also required to discuss with you as those charged with governance. The way we tend to deal with this each year is to bring this paper to you. So it's a compilation of the comments that officers have made on all these areas, which we basically bring to you just to give you an opportunity to kind of take ownership and recognise that what officers have told us does reflect the county council's arrangements insofar as you know them, and we recognise that you won't, as elected members, you won't be as close to the detail of those arrangements, but nevertheless, as those charged with governance, we would hope that you would have oversight of them. So that's essentially what that first report is. It's a compilation of information given to us by your officers in response to the particular areas that we asked for comment on. We don't have any concerns about the arrangements as described in there. And then the second paper, it's simply an addendum to the audit plan that we brought to your last meeting in January. It's something we have done at all of our audited bodies this year, is to introduce an additional significant risk around COVID-19. It's quite a wide-ranging risk in that some of it deals with the sort of logistical aspects of both officers compiling the accounts and us auditing them. So it reflects the fact that there is and was an increased chance of staff sickness on both sides, which might make the process more difficult. The fact that we are working remotely and that your finance teams are working in turn remotely, and some of the particular difficulties that causes us in terms of ensuring the veracity of the information that we are being given. So it deals with all those logistical things, but it also deals with some of the impact on the accounts themselves. So one of the big changes or big issues this year really is around the valuation of various assets and liabilities, which is a lot more difficult to measure. There is a much higher level of estimation uncertainty in the accounts of both the county council and the pension fund around the value of land and buildings, for example, particularly those land and buildings where they are valued on a sort of market value basis, and also in the pension fund, the value of pension fund investments is subject to a great deal of fluctuation and uncertainty, given the timing of the pandemic actually hitting. So those are all areas that we are talking with your officers about. We've got a catch up next week, which is well timed, and we'll be going through some of those issues and also the impact of COVID-19 on the county council's finances. So I think that's probably all that I need to say to you about those two papers, but quite happy to take any comments or questions you have.
Thank you very much, John, for that presentation. And I don't think there's any real surprises in there. It's overlaid and affected dramatically by the pandemic. Now, I know that Mr. Richardson would like to ask a question, so if I can invite you, Terry, please, to ask your question.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick one. I didn't see any mention of IFRS 35 in there, which I understand has been deferred a year. Now, I know it's appeared in previous audit reports. So are we implementing IFRS 35 this year if there are any cases where it needs to be done, or are we taking the ability to defer it in accordance with government guidelines?
Can I just check, are you referring to IFRS 35 or IFRS 16? I think IFRS 16 is the one that we've had the discussions about before.
I thought 35 had appeared in our comments before. If I'm wrong, I apologise.
As far as I'm aware, it's 16,
Okay.
which is the one on leases. And I mean, yes, basically, adoption of that has been within the public sector has been deferred by a year. So that's just taken a little bit of extra pressure off your officers this year in terms of actually the compilation of the account. I don't know whether Declan wants to comment any further on that.
Yeah, in terms of the sorry, apologies. The IFRS that was the implementation that was delayed was relating to leases, whether that kind of helps Mr. Richardson. It wasn't expected to have sort of a huge impact, but it does have quite a big impact in terms of workload, as there's a huge amount of collation needs to happen across the organisations, actually into schools as well. So it is welcome. It's deferred, because I don't think to be honest, it doesn't have an effect on the reader of accounts in terms of a material view on the authority, but it does have a material impact in terms of workload.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to ask committee, Mr. Tambini, could I invite you to make a statement on this?
Yeah, it's a kind of a statement and a bit of a question actually for John, because I know members have heard kind of Declan and myself kind of talking about our difficult financial situation, and clearly going concern of financial sustainability is a key risk in terms of the County Council. But just kind of John's view on his view kind of nationally, how he thinks that's going to pan out, and the position of some of the other authorities, and whether he's got any comments on that, given that Grant Thornton is a bit of a unique situation, given that they have such a large proportion of the audit market.
Thank you. Good.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly there are some massive unknowns in terms of the financial situations of every authority in the country at the moment, because there is a lack of clarity in terms of whether there is going to be any additional government funding over and above that which has already been pledged and distributed. And I think until we get more clarity on that, it's difficult to be too conclusive. I mean, from what I have seen of the reporting to members here in Leicestershire, as I would have predicted, the impact of COVID looks very significant, but it doesn't look as dramatically significant as it is in some authorities. Very difficult to get through to an absolute truth, though, because I think there is a lot of kind of posturing going on in relation to this, with it suiting some agendas to emphasise the extent of the difficulties. But there really are some authorities out there in a far more difficult position than you. There is a lot of publicity at the moment about the possibility of Section 151 officers having to go down the route of issuing Section 114 notices, where those Section 151 officers don't believe that the budget can be balanced anymore. But equally, they are in the process of amending the guidance around that to ensure that those Section 151 officers actually discuss the situation with the government before pressing that particular drastic button. So, I mean, as I say, it's difficult to get an absolute true position. We are doing a lot of analysis ourselves around the returns that are going into the government about additional costs. It's not a great situation for local government, but the big unknown is any future funding, and whether that is going to be directed purely at funding increased expenditure, or to what extent it's actually going to fund reductions in income as well. I don't know whether that helps, Chris, but that's kind of my take on the situation.
No, that's really useful, John. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, John. I think that it is very difficult to, in such a rapidly moving scenario, it is difficult to cover everything. And there will be things that emerge that we haven't even thought of. And it's inevitable. It's not negligence or anything like that, but it is really difficult. Now, I have not seen anybody else who wants to ask a question. I'll just check if you do want to ask a question, either speak now or instant message me, but if there are no other questions, I will can I move that the report is taken as notice, and members agree that all comments now made will be captured in the minutes in the usual way, so that all the discussions we've had and the risks and everything else will be brought out in the minutes. So unless I have any dissent, I will take that committee is happy to agree that report, and thank John for a presentation. Thank you. So moving on, we now move on to the appointment of the independent person as outlined on pages 81 to 84 of the report. This is a fairly straightforward report. I will ask Lauren Haslam, Director of Law and Governance, to present the item. The options for what they can do are within the report, but if I may, can I ask Lauren please to present the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. As members are aware, there are two of the council processes that are underpinned by a statutory requirement to have an independent person. Those processes are the review and investigation of complaints in relation to members under the Member Code of Conduct, but also the procedure to dismiss the three statutory officers, so the monitoring officer, the chief exec and the Section 151 officer. The process broadly requires that the independent persons are consulted before any decisions are made on any of those issues. The County Council has a small group of independent persons who were appointed in 2016 and who hold office therefore until for 4 years until September 2020. This report seeks permission of the committee to progress with the recruitment of independent persons, and for efficiency's sake, in the past the independent persons have served in a dual capacity, both on behalf of the County Council but also on behalf of the Combined Fire Authority. And the proposal is that that arrangement continues, subject to any comments or contrary views that members may have. The other factor to take into account in relation to this report is that members may recall in January 2019, going back some time now, the Committee on Standards in Public Life completed a report and review into member conduct related issues and the standards regime. Unfortunately, that report's got a little delayed in terms of progress. It's not going to win any prizes for a rapid review. But last week, the LGA, on behalf of the committee, produced a draft model code for consultation. And the plan is that that code be brought to this committee at its next meeting in July, so members' views can be taken into account. That code is likely to have some implications for the independent person's role, so we'll need to take that into account in the process. So the recommendations are contained at paragraphs 16A and B, and you'll see that we've built into the recommendations a little bit of flexibility really in relation to timing in case there is any delay in the recruitment process because of the current situation that we find ourselves in. But the process overall requires an appointment by the council and the involvement of members of this committee if possible. Place over the summer period. So I'm happy to take any questions members may have on that, but hopefully it's a relatively straightforward report, really just continuing with our current arrangements, but as I say, appointing or potentially reappointing the current independent members, or some of them if they wish to serve again. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. I think that's fairly clear and straightforward. And the review of the member code of conduct and is going to come forward in July, as Lauren has told us. I wonder if there are any questions. It doesn't appear that way at the moment, and that's no great surprise. So, if there are no other questions, I propose that we agree the proposed joint recruitment process with the Leicestershire and Rutland Combined Fire Authority for the appointment of the independent persons from the 30th September 2020 for a term of 4 years, and authorise the monitoring officer to agree adjustments to the recruitment timetable with the Combined Fire Authority, and if necessary to make recommendations to the Constitution Committee and the full Council following consultation with the Chairman of this Committee, as she considers necessary to ensure the continued running of the Council's member complaints process if the recruitment cannot take place in time for the Council meeting in September 2020. I'm happy to move these two recommendations. Please may I have a seconder to it? If somebody could speak, that would be good.
Happy to.
I'll second it, Chair. Jeffrey Kaufman.
Thank you. And can I take it it is agreed if there is no dissent? There is nobody showing any dissent to that, so that's taken as done.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lauren. We now move on to the item 9, the quarterly Treasury Management Update, as is set out in page 85 to 96 of the pack. I'm going to ask Declan to present this item. So, Declan, if I could invite you to present this item, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So it's the standard Treasury Management report. So I'll just take you through it in summary, and happy to take questions at the end. The economic outlook section, obviously this just runs for Q1, so there was the start of this kind of the financial crisis that we now find ourselves in as a result of the pandemic. But the Q1 was poor, and obviously the outline in the report is expected to get worse. I mean, obviously, kind of if anybody's picked up the news this morning, you'll see some horrendous figures from sort of the UK. Europe's come out now, and sort of we had the Fed raising alarm yesterday as well. So it's kind of the almost confirmation of how bad it can get. The question obviously is how long it will take to for the economic recovery to take place, and also kind of the situation within there. Inflation gets talked about a lot, whether inflation will boom or whether inflation will just kind of die. I think it was Andrew Bailey, the Bank of England's kind of head came out this morning saying there's no such thing as a sort of a typical recession, which is very true. So it's a kind of a bit of a case of working through this one and seeing how it goes. But I think the thing that there is wide consensus of is that base rates will remain low for an extended period now. That even if there is a fairly rapid economic recovery, for that to really take place in a deep-seated way is going to take a lot of sort of government intervention, central bank intervention. So base rates will remain low for an extended period, potentially negative, although the Fed, Bank of England, the main banks do seem to be kind of a bit cooler on that than some of the others that have been. As a result of sort of the base rates cuts that were enacted fairly quickly, we have seen a kind of a decline in the sort of the rates that we are earning on new borrowing or new lending at the moment, and that decline in rates is only expected to get worse on the overall position and on the short-term position. Coupled with that as well, we did see a sort of a slight decline in cash balances, and that was expected ordinarily at the end of the year because we get funded in advance. So it does tend to the cash does tend to ease off at the end of the year. It was partly offset by some additional sort of government funding, so that the balances themselves are still pretty healthy. In light of sort of what was going on, and almost harking back a bit to the financial crisis at in sort of 2008, 2009, we did decide to kind of try and make this sort of the portfolio a bit more liquid. Apologies, it was missed off the table in the report, but we're holding sort of £25 million at the end of March in cash with NatWest rather than on money market funds, which is unusual for us because we don't earn any sort of any return by just holding it basically in the sort of the deposit account, in the sort of the normal kind of current account, as it were. But the reason we made that decision was there was greater uncertainty over kind of the liquidity in the financial markets initially, and would we get into sort of a credit crunch type situation or not. And the other thing obviously is kind of the credit rating of banks. You don't want to get caught with a sort of a 12-month loan and suddenly finding somebody's got a warning over them quite quickly. And how we dealt with that was we stopped using money market funds, and we restricted any new loans to no more than 6 months, just give ourselves that liquidity. I mean, fortunately, kind of what we've seen is actually kind of very different to the credit crunch. Central banks have acted very, very quickly and in a very, very sort of significant way. So liquidity in the market's unbelievable at the moment, far more than you'd normally get. The amount of money in kind of money market funds is astronomical at the moment. I think it's £5 trillion sort of globally. So it's kind of it's just sort of staggering figures that you can't get your head around in some ways, and the credit ratings of banks have held up very, very well. There's been no downgrades of the banks that we'd ordinarily look to use. So what we're looking at sort of now is kind of we've had that sort of additional liquidity, and it also helps with sort of some of the interventions we've had to make with our suppliers as well. We've provided sort of liquidity to sort of the care market, particularly in sort of adult social care, to make sure those companies can continue to function. But now we've got more certainty over our internal cash position and the global sort of financial landscape. Although the economic news is staggering, the actual financial markets are functioning pretty well. We are going to sort of reverse some of those interventions on a gradual basis, sort of bit by bit, keeping an eye on things, and restart to use things like money market funds. In terms of the month itself, we didn't have any issues with the loans made. Everything was made in accordance with policy. You'll note in the report it does talk about Goldman Sachs and their credit default swaps, and that's really sort of the price. When the price of those goes up, it's a sign that an organisation's got a bit riskier. In the case of Goldman's, it was just on the cusp of when the bad news started to come out, and it was corrected in a matter of days. So we were mid-loan, so in truth, there's not a lot of action you can take, but it was reassuring that it did come back to normality very, very, very sort of quickly. The final point I want to make on the report is we've noted in there in this sort of resource implications section that we made £2.5 million of interest in 2019-20. That figure is going to halve for 2021 at least. It may get even worse, to be honest. But you can see there's a direct implication on the county council's budget. So I was going to pause there. I'm happy to take any comments or questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Declan. I mean, a very difficult situation. They're very difficult to predict. I hope we certainly don't go into negative interest rates. The government has put tremendous amount of effort into trying to sustain business and help individuals, and a lot remains to be seen. But really, really difficult, unprecedented times, and I always look at economists, it's almost a bit like being a soothsayer. It really is very, very clunky, and we can't be sure of the outcomes, but I think we've done everything we can to help ourselves. Now, I know that I have a question from Mr. Bolter, so if I could ask Mr. Bolter to come forward with his question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. First of all, notice we made £55 million new loans. And item 14, it says we kept the high cash balances have been kept. The real question is item 15. I I understand Santander are paying no dividends for the next 12 months. How safe are they now? And did they pay the £5 million back? They should have paid us back this month, I believe, or was it last month? And there's £20 million to pay in September. How safe are they?
Thank you, Mr. Bolter. It was a common request from the Bank of England. It was basically an instruction to all banks not to pay dividends. So this is obviously it was part of the shoring up of the financial system to make sure that kind of we didn't get into that sort of credit crunch situation. Obviously, kind of if as soon as a bank pays a dividend, it reduces that buffer it's got against future losses. So that the banks were instructed, to sort of hold on to the cash, as it were, and it was kind of an industry-wide measure. So we've never had to date, obviously don't want to sort of tempt fate, but we've never had a problem with sort of getting the money back and the interest that's due on the loan on time from any of our counterparties. In terms of Santander's credit rating, they're not the very best, but they are still one of the best. There's quite a lot of banks and building societies that we don't include on our counterparty list, so they are still a good bet, as it were, and we're still comfortable with lending to them.
Okay.
It's just that, I wonder, because they're a Spanish bank, aren't they? Do we normally invest in overseas banks?
Yeah, I think, Mr. Walter, I understand your concerns, but Declan can correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a pretty vigorous risk assessment of who we can invest with and the terms based on their credit rating, and I'm not sure, but I think we probably employ external credit assessors as well to advise us as to the risks. But I very much take your point, but perhaps Declan could add a little bit of clarity to that.
No, that's correct, Chair. We do employ some sort of external treasury management advisors, and they take a range of information from across the sort of different credit agencies. They also look in the sort of I suppose the financial sort of news that's emerging as well, and also things like the live markets, which is what the credit default swaps that I touched on is really doing. That sort of people are kind of they're pricing the risk of banks on a sort of a routine basis. So they do bring that various information together to give us a proposed list. And what we do then is we trim off the kind of the riskier elements of that. And when I say riskier, it still is in the context of it's very unlikely that these institutions are getting into financial difficulties. But we take a fairly prudent list and make it even more prudent before we start doing any lending. Which is why, kind of like I say, through the credit crunch, things like BCCI in the past, Icelandic banks, we haven't had the problems that sort of people have got into in the past. It's not to say that we never would. You can't kind of foresee everything, but we do have a pretty prudent lending list. In terms of the foreign banks question, that's although Santander is a sort of a Spanish headquartered bank, it does have a registered British bank. So there is a Santander UK that's got operations in the UK and is regulated in the sort of the same way that kind of a British domiciled bank would be, and that does restrict the kind of the capital flows that Santander can make back to its kind of home country, as it were, versus what it can keep in the country. So Santander UK is the bank that we kind of are assessing that it's okay to borrow to, and that tends to be the same with these other ones. You'll notice on the list we've also got the Australia and New Zealand Bank, and they've got sort of offices in London as well. So it does tend to be kind of a UK, even though it's a kind of a foreign-owned and headquartered bank, it does tend to have a UK presence that falls under UK regulation, and all our loans are made in sterling as well. So we do kind of strip out all those sort of potential risks as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Declan. I mean, I think on a daily basis you probably receive updates on the credit rating of a lot of these institutions. There is no such thing as no risk, but within reasonable, the 204 million that we have invested is spread well over a number of banks, and those banks are assessed on a regular basis. So if there are no other questions, I will ask that the committee notes this report, and is everybody happy to do that? and all the comments we've made will be taken into consideration. So if there are no other comments, we'll take that. So that deals with the quarterly Treasury Management Report, and now we move on to the next item, which is item 10. If I can just and let me have a look at that. So that is the annual Treasury Management Report. So if I could ask Declan again, please, to present this report.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So this is the annual report, as members will be familiar with. We bring it here to take any comments to Cabinet where we do report in line with sort of SITFA guidelines. And really what the annual report does is it pulls together all the quarterly reports that you've sort of seen throughout the year. So I'll only give a very, very quick reminder of what's in there. To be honest, it's kind of it's a fairly sort of standard report, and there's nothing of too much excitement in the report. So as members will be aware, there's no borrowing in there. There's no borrowing undertaken this year, and all lending's been in line with policy. The only blip that we had, that sort of slight bit of nervousness around sort of the Goldman Sachs credit default swap that I mentioned in the quarterly report, but all the actions done were in line with policy. You'll see the debt levels in the report have reduced ever so slightly. The penalties are still in place that makes early repayment sort of prohibitive, although that would be obviously our preference. And you'll see this sort of this strange kind of accounting phrase in there of being over borrowed. And what that basically is, we've got a statutory provision that we make to repay debt through the MRP, the minimum resource sort of provision that means that we're kind of basically just saving up to repay debt when it becomes due. And because that debt's not coming due for a couple of decades, it does mean we're going to get this over borrowed term where we've got more debt than we really need. Our cash is kind of trapped a little bit because we can't repay that debt without sort of onerous penalties. If the opportunities did come up, we would look to take it. Interestingly, in the NTFS, we did start to utilise much more of our cash balances to sort of fund the capital programme. So that over-borrowed position may disappear on a temporary basis, depending on what we do with the capital programme. But that's kind of I suppose it's a managed process. Like I say, the debt's not due for a couple of decades, so it's just trying to utilise the strengths of the council's balance sheet to sort of avoid external borrowing. In truth, which is obviously cheaper for the council. Moving into the investment side of things, you'll notice the average return for the year was 1%, which compares favourably to sort of both base rates and kind of if we were just sort of put the money on the money market funds. I mean, to give you sort of a sense of order of magnitude, if we'd have just put everything on money market funds, we'd earn about £1.5 million less interest in the year. So obviously, kind of although it's a bit of I know it makes members sort of slightly nervous about lending money to the sort of range of banks, it is worth it. Sort of £1.5 million goes a long way, and that's £1.5 million every year that we do get in there. The table on, sorry, I'm struggling with the screen. If I just direct members to page 105, you'll see we've included a benchmarking report for the first time, and you'll see there's a little chart there. It sets us in context of where we are compared to other authorities. So we're kind of this strange looking little diamond on that page. But you see we're quite close to the green line, which is basically this chart. What it tries to do is assess the return you make against the risk that you take, and we're doing okay on that. We're sort of towards the green line, which suggests a higher level of return as opposed to the red line, which is a lower level of return. And what nudges us to the green line isn't that we take particularly risky counterparties, but it is that we are happy to sort of make longer loans, normally sort of up to, we only ever go to a maximum of 12 months, and that just allows a little bit more return to be taken without too much more risk taken on. A natural question is why others have done better than us. There's a mixture of reasons there. We limited ourselves to 12 months is one restriction, but it's one that we're relatively happy to take because the amount that you earn isn't that much more, although you can see that people are above us. And the other element is local authority lending, which does tend to suppress your weighted risk compared to banks. But obviously we haven't been engaged in that for quite a while. So happy to take any comments or questions for the committee, particularly in advance of the Cabinet meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Declan. I mean, the fact that we've earned an extra £1 million, it certainly sounds good news. It's I mean, you can see the advice from Link Asset Management Services. It's a reassuring report. We're obviously not taking any massive risk, but very difficult, because who would ever have thought that some major banks within the UK, never mind abroad, ran into difficulties in the credit crunch, and thankfully they've now returned to health, although some of them are still heavily invested with imbibed with government money. But if there are no questions, the committee is asked to note this report, and I think Declan has clearly identified all the risks and the rewards for what we're doing. So committee is asked to note this report, and if there is no dissension, and there doesn't appear to be, we'll move on to the next item. So the next item is the Internal Audit Services Annual Report 2019-20, which is on page 111 to 150 of the agenda pack. If I could ask Neil, please, now to present. Neil, if I could invite you to present the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so agenda item 11, the Internal Audit Service Annual Report. What this paper does is it explains that I'm required under internal audit standards to present an annual report to what's classed as a board for the purposes of the County Council. That's a Corporate Governance Committee. There are specific requirements to incorporate into the report, but I consider the most important part of that is what they call producing an opinion on the overall adequacy and effectiveness of the Council's control environment. That is, its frameworks of systems of governance, risk management and internal control. So in terms of how I reached my opinion this year, may I firstly ask members to turn to Annex 1, which starts on page 121 of your pack. Unfortunately, that's one of the pages with the shaded header, which makes it a little bit difficult to read, so apologies about that. But on the following page 122, I explain how I use a combination of evidence to reach the opinion, including the findings of audits and other control environmental work undertaken. They are summarised in Annex 2, pages 127 to 43, but I'll mention more on those later. There isn't any formal guidance to heads of audit on forming an opinion at the moment. So what I personally choose to do is give sub-opinions on each of the three components of the control environment, so each one of governance, risk management and control. As I mentioned earlier on, I think the control environment was in a steady state for a period of roughly 10 months around the year, but then obviously the last 6 to 8 weeks of February and March were a unique period of upheaval and disruption to normal processes and procedures. So what I chose to do was identify and evaluate some of the Council's responses during that time. And for this unique year, after explaining my findings during the 10-month period of steady state, what I've done then is to outline some observations and assurances I gained during the initial coronavirus period. Overall, I concluded that the Council's control environment remained adequate and effective for the year, and I just want to give members assurance that senior management and officers were very engaging in that process. I also placed reliance on a positive assurance opinion received from my peer at Nottingham City Council, which provides the internal audit function for East Midlands Shared Services, which provides payroll, HR and financial services. If I can now take members back into the pages 115 to 120, which is headed Appendix, which is actually the annual report. And after some background on page 116, I'll repeat the overall opinion at the top of page 117. Then starting paragraph 9 through 18 is where I provide more context on the information contained in Annex 2, explaining what assurance audits were undertaken and that they mostly return substantial assurance ratings. Again, for the committee's assurance, those that don't return a substantial or above rating continue to be followed up and will remain in the committee's domain until I'm satisfied that enough action has taken place. I then refer to our advisory role, and that we either undertook or assisted also with 10 investigations. And in paragraph 17 I mentioned I do have some slight impairments as classed by the standards to my independence and objectivity, because I have responsibilities for the risk management framework and the counter-fraud activity. So controls of those are already, for some, built into the internal audit charter. Finally, paragraph 18 explains that my oversight of other functions assists in ensuring that the control environment remains robust. Paragraph 1926 then goes on to explain how the service performed and shows that a good number of audits were completed. There was a pleasing increase in the number of productive days, a budget underspend, and that we generally received good service ratings, albeit on a low number of returns. Finally, on this report, after report, we still unfortunately haven't been able to progress to migrating to one case management system. That's still in the hands of the developers there. But the service review has restarted, but then it's been realigned to new ways of working to establish internal audit services own new normal. So that's all I have to say on the report. I'll take any questions.
Thank you very much, Neil. It's a reassuring report, but very difficult to cover off all risks. But as far as humanly possible, it seems as though that gives members quite a lot of reassurance. Now, I have a question from Mr. Bolter, so if I could invite him to ask his question.
Thank you, Neil. Page 117, item 11. 5 graded partial assurances. Can you give a bit more detail on that, please?
Yes, they will be contained. If I can turn you to page 127, I can tell you the names of them starting page 127. I'm just trying. I should have flagged them up beforehand. So there was there were audits around the fee review, implementation, and residential care. There's a maintained school, Burbage infants. There was an audit of early years funding. There was an audit of information security awareness and training, and one on records management. So that's the list of the audits. If you can hang on to my next follow-up report, in the high importance recommendation element of that report, there is detailed explanation of why we graded those partial.
Thank you, Chairman.
Is that sufficient for now?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah.
Look, no, thank you, Mr. Bolter. So, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question? I can't see any questions there. So, moving on, the committee is asked to note the Internal Audit Service Annual Report for 2019-20 and agree that a copy of this is distributed to all members of the Council. Can I take the report as noted and that all members have agreed that a copy of this be circulated to all members as proposed? Now, if there's no dissent on that, I will take that as agreed. We now move on to the final item on the report, which is on the committee agenda, and this is on the Internal Audit Service Progress Report, which is on page 151 to 168. Again, if I could ask Neil, please, to present his report.
Thank you again, Chair. So members received this report as a routine report to each committee. It outlines the work that we've undertaken in the previous period and the progress with implementing high importance recommendations. Nevertheless, for this report, in terms of the virus and the impact on the service, I've added in 2 sections. So firstly, how did the virus impact the internal audit service, and then how we're going to develop an audit plan for the remainder of the year. So I'll come on to those in a while. But in terms of the routine reporting, Appendix 1, pages 157 to 164, provides a summary of the 4-month period to the end of May over our assurance, consulting work, investigations and assisting others, etc. Appendix 2, pages 165 to 168, and I just referred to this with Mr. Bolter's question. This then outlines the position with progressing the implementation of high importance recommendations. So within that list of audits that I read out in the previous paper, there will be some level of detail in that appendix between pages 165 to 168 on why we graded those audits high importance and the recommendations that came out of it. Just reiterate before I move on that those recommendations will stay in the committee's domain until I'm satisfied that they've been closed off. I will take any questions on those later on if needs be. But in summary, for high importance recommendation for this period, there were 3 audits that contained new high importance recommendations. There were 3 where the original recommendation implementation dates have been extended out for various reasons, and then there are the 3 where the recommendations have been pleasingly closed off. Then starting on page 153, paragraphs 11 to 17 explains how the coronavirus has impacted the internal audit service. So this will be a unique part of the report, really. So I can summarise that as I had early discussions with my peers in the Midlands, and we reviewed our business continuity arrangements. We recognised that we were well equipped as a service and established to continue working from any site, including home. We did have some impact continuing work during the period of the first significant upheaval, but then we also needed to be very empathic to the unique demands on auditees. We reviewed our plans and identified which audits we could continue, pause or stop. We recognised that some of our high importance recommendations may no longer be that important to management, especially if their service is due to change. We moved our emphasis to advisory work, helping managers to review controls designed to implement alternative service delivery. As I mentioned earlier, management were very engaged in that process. We also accepted that internal audit, whilst important, wasn't classed as business critical. So it was a no-brainer really to redeploy some staff to operational services. That's beginning to dwindle off now after 2.5 months of provision. I've provided a table to explain the resources utilised on responding to the virus at the bottom of page 154. And then finally on this report, on page 155, paragraphs 18 and 19, I explained to the committee that the committee should have received the annual internal audit plan at its original scheduled meeting in May. Obviously the virus impacted on completing that. So we now need to look forward into the future, but like my peers or the heads of internal audit, I think this will need to be in small, short steps, possibly only for the next 3 months, and taking account of what external changes may lie ahead. Finally, paragraph 19 explains that the service will not only provide audits of the future delivery plans of others, but we will have to review our own processes in order to find our own new normal. That's all I have to say, Chair, so gladly take any questions.
Thank you very much, Neil. I think really it's the whole County Council as a whole has responded with incredible agility to the completely unprecedented situation, which is admirable and understandable the delay in producing a report for the rest of the year, but I see that you're bringing that forward into the July meeting, and I think to chunk it out as the situation develops makes ultimate sense. I have no questions, so the report asks that the committee notes the contents of the routine update, and unless any member objects, can I take it as noted? It appears that everybody is happy to do that. There is no dissension from that. So I take that as an agreement. The date of the next committee meeting is scheduled to take place on Friday the 24th of July at 10 o'clock. And I hope to see you then. It will be nice at some stage to see people in person rather than on a video screen, but I think we haven't had any technical glitches so far. I don't want to tempt precedents, and I thank all members for their input. It is appreciated. It's not easy doing this, and also the assistance from the officers to set this up and run it has been really impressive. There are no other urgent items, so I will now call this meeting to an end, and I hopefully will see you again on the 24th of July. Right, so the meeting is now closed.